Well, hello everyone, and welcome to 814 of 25. I am Delbridge of Benchmark Realty, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and this little white spot on the hat, can't see it in real life, but the camera picks it up. It must be something to do with the spectra of light. All right, we got a good show for you today. Hopefully, we'll go through it pretty quick. If I'm talking fast and stumbling over my words, I'm just trying to get to it without taking your entire life. If you like this content, please go to CallDelToSell.com, find the tab that says on YouTube, click it, and it'll open up a page of QR codes. There you can use a smartphone to scan and get to the YouTube page, or you can just mouse over and click it on a PC. There you'll be able to subscribe to this little button over here and click the notification bell so that YouTube will notify you. Well, today I'm going to kick against the ropes a little bit here because I'm going to lay the case out why we do not want the Fed to drop the rates right now and why it's beneficial to you. Now, a lot of this is going to be how you look at things. Now, if you've been following me through the years, you know that I gave the Democrats a hard time because of their fiscal policy and the things that they were doing. And if the Republicans are doing something wrong, we're going to give them a hard time because it's not about the politics. It's not about who to vote for or when to vote for. It's about how politics drives the economy, and the economy drives the state economy. The state economy drives the personal economy, and that boils down to your life and mine. So that's what we do. I call it people ticks. It's how politics affects people's life through economics. The definition actually changes time to time, but you get the idea. The idea is not to be political; it's to explain why things are happening. Because in the words of a wise man, sometimes you can't never tell. All right, well, let's go over to this main screen first. So on the big screen, the first place we're going to go is to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. We're going to keep it on this page for just a little bit. This is your government. We can argue whether or not it's being recorded right or whatever. You know, we've seen a little drama of that recently, but you know, all we're going to look at right here, right now, is we've had energy way down. This may be a sign of recession coming up because if energy is way down, it means we're not anticipating as much, so we're not buying as many futures, that kind of thing. It also could be that we've changed our policy, so we're no longer hating ourselves in the world, and so we're opening up for future possibilities, and it's all based on that. I think that's probably more what it is. Now we look at all items. This is everything. We're only at 2.7%. They were crying all over this week. Oh, we're supposed to be so high and the world's coming to an end, and the whole, you know, it's just fatiguing, isn't it? Isn't it just fatiguing? But it actually came in lower than anticipated. So I think that's good news. So if we go back to it, let's hit that button again. We see major category is still less than 3, but it's not near 2. So if we go by Chairman Powell's and the committee's idea that we need to be at 2, we're not there. So that's one argument for not cutting rates anytime soon because it's 2.9. Now we see that major categories, it's a little over 3. So no, we're not that much improved. In some respects we are because energy, and that's brought things down. And as the other side of the argument who's trying to trash the current administration, everything's tariffs. Well, we're making the deals. Things are shifting in, coming in pretty nice. Things are looking good. We've got a lot of revenue, but we do still have challenges. You know, it's like you rob Peter to pay Paul. So here we have that. That is the CPI. So it's saying that we're really pretty close to, you know, let's just call it pretty close to 3. We're coming up a little bit from the closer to 2. But also remember, Chairman Powell didn't require a 2.0 CPI or PCE in order to give a full percentage cut before. And we're going to see the impact of that in just a second because that was right at the election. And so we expect some inflation as a result of cutting it when he didn't need to cut it back in 2024. So we're going to look at it. Now let's look at the PPI because I think it's going to be suggesting that we might have some inflation loading. And you can say, well, this is all because of PPI right here. You can say it's all because of tariffs if you want to. Don't really care what we blame it on. We're just going to look at whether or not it's going to be there or not. See, it says PPI for final demand advances almost 1% in July. Services 1.1%. So the biggest part is services increases 0.7%. Let's go back to CPI. Look what we're going to blame it on when we have our main bunch of our categories. It's shelter, it's housing, right? You see that right there, right there. Shelter is up. That's the cause of it. They pull it up. We can see what that's going to be. All urban consumers 0.2%, 2.7 over the last 12 months, not seasonally adjusted. Indices for items less than food and energy 0.3. July seasonally adjusted 3.1% over the NSA. Okay, so there we go. We can drill down. We don't have time. So we see the housing is driving things up. Energy is down, housing is up. Look at goods. Its services are up over goods. So we don't get tariffs so much on the goods or the services as we do the goods, but what is the big jump? It's in the commodities. It's in the services here. The goods, not so much. In fact, look at that ratio, 1.1, 2.7. So I don't really buy that the PPI is loading up because of tariffs. Although I did just buy 2 relays this week, and they were nice on, was it Amazon? They were about $30. Everywhere I was looking at about $30. I found a place that had, about 3,000 of them suckers in Texas, and it was $17. It said tariffs may apply, but they're sitting in Texas. Why would a tariff apply if they're already sitting in Texas? So I ordered 2 of them. They added $7 a piece for tariffs. I don't know. I think I just got taken a little bit on the old free shipping. Yeah, but you pay more for the product if you get free shipping. Yeah, we know how that works. So here's the bad news. I'm going to kick this one in on us. I'm sure we've all heard this. Now, remember, what I'm laying the groundwork for is the argument that we don't want to have a cut in Fed rates right now. It's not necessary, and I'll show you why. Let's look at this. This is Realtor.com, so let's go ahead and see what we got going on here. This has hit us. It says that Tennessee is the #1 slowest market. Now, if you're a seller, you're going, I don't know if I like that. May not be able to get the big bands out of it. But considering the growth, if you've bought past, say, before 2020, if you're anytime before the big inflation hit, you could probably still, even though things are slow, still cut some price off of it. Even though we are having quite a bit of fall throughs, still probably bang some big bucks on it, come out ahead. But it would depend on your individual situation. But what does it say? It says we are slow. What happens when things are slow in any kind of business? Well, if you're slow on your donut sales, you have day-old donuts and you cut prices. So that's going to be a little good for the buyer if we slow down. But it's really just adjusting for that hot streak that we hit. It's what I think is going on. So let's see how the slowness is hitting us, because, again, everything's supply and demand. Now, do we need the interest rates cut? I mean, if you've got a credit card, you got a lot of debt and everything, yeah, you might want it. But ultimately, to the overall economy and jobs and all that kind of good jazz, do we really need to cut it, or do we just need to not monkey with it for a little bit longer? Well, let's take a look at this right here. Mortgage News Daily. Well, let's go ahead and knock out the daily and the MBA. Let's just take Freddie Mac. Can we do that? All right. Well, right now, as of this last one, Freddie Mac this was 8/14, which is today, 8/14 today, 6.58%. That's your Freddie Mac right there. You see that? Is that showing up on the screen, Freddie Mac? All right, now if we come all the way over to this end, we want to get below, what was that, 6.58? Well, right here in 1031, it's 6.72. The next one is 10 of 24. That's showing up here that I'm able to pick this point. That's 6.54. That's just a little bit below, and that's 10 of 24. So that's really 9 months ago, more or less, is it not? From 10, end of 10, to, let's just call it less than the middle part of 8. So that's really 9+ months right there. So we're at a 9-month low, and that takes in effect also the cut in rates that Chairman Powell did in the tail end of 2024. So we're having our rates go down even though the Fed has not cut their rate. So perhaps the reason we're seeing this kind of winky back and forth at us is because we have some slow markets out there. And in our case, you might find people are willing to really work with you, that they might have the time to work on your mortgage rate and your closings and all that kind of good jazz to go with it, because it's slow for them. Now, if you're a buyer, that's good. If you're a seller, it might not maximize your dollar, but it is what it is. We're lowering, we have got the rates, mortgage rates coming down, even though the Fed hasn't changed it. And the point of this show is to say, yeah, maybe we don't really want a rate cut right now for the grand picture of things. We saw the CPI. It's not looking too terribly bad. It's going up just a little bit. Producer price index, it looks like it's loading a little bit more. People are going to blame that on tariffs, but where did we see the big jump? Was it in goods or was it in services? It was in services. And we saw that once we cut the mortgage rates at the tail end of 24, we're bound to expect some accelerating inflation in 25. Now we're halfway through 25. We heard that it was just going to crash everything with this skyrocket, and it didn't happen. Henny penny did not happen. So let's look at one other thing right here. Fred, this is St. Louis, Federal Reserve's economic data. Let's look at the M2 money supply, because I have another picture we'll look at on the other screen here in just a second. We were going along. We started really starting to get that money. We started to love that money since the economic crisis that was the great financial crisis. We see that long recession. We have been on spending the money on the bank card since then, until the scandemic came through. And what happened as soon as we had a change of power, we put the big spenders in. They had all three houses. February, starting January, we went from 15 trillion short order to 18 trillion. We really, I'll let you do the ratio on that, but that's, you can see right there, that's a huge bunch. Then we waited, and then we eventually started doing some quantitative tightening, and that was working, and everybody started crying that the rates were too high because they got used to them being too low, and we've been growing them back up again. So here is that little bit of increasing that money supply right here. And when did it start happening? About February of 2024. We're starting to ease out of our little fears. There we go. Now, let's look at this other screen. Right, this is that picture that I had produced some time ago. I had seen a Gen Zer screaming, banging, having a total meltdown. What do they call it? Crashing out. He was crashing out in his car, blaming everything on the boomers, that we ruined his future, took everything from him, blah, blah, blah. It was the boomers' fault. And if it hadn't been the boomers, he'd have blamed it on the Gen Xers, right? It had been one of us. It's not their fault, somebody else's fault. Let's go see what it really was in real life. So I made him this thing. If you'll notice, this is back in 2024, and here at the tail end of 2023 on this. But what I want to show you is, since we just looked at that money supply, if we go back to the center, what did we see? The money supply goes to January of 2020, when we changed hands in the three branches of government. We're all the same party. They spent the money. Of course, we had the COVID, so that was the reason. But we really went from January of 2020 to its peak in February of 2022. Just call it January, 2 years. It went $22 trillion from $15.5 trillion. You see what that money injection did to us over here on this panel. We were going along. This is the Home Ownership Affordability Monitor. This is from the Atlanta Fed. And we're coming through. The green is, of course, the U.S., and orange is the metro area. That's our area, Franklin, Nashville. And we were below average, about 25% of the income. Here is when the big spend was. I just showed you that on the money supply. We had a full lag while they were telling us that inflation was transitory and it wasn't no big deal. And it took all the way into 2022 before we started to see the inflation really bite us on the buttocks. Okay, 1 year before we started rising, inflation lagged 1 year. Then we started seeing it really start to get out of hand, and we're here where we are in 2024. Now, if we look over here on Statista, I've been mispronouncing. I heard somebody pronounce it as Statista, and I have always pronounced it as something different. Inflation rate and Federal Reserve interest rates. I combine these two together. So the black is going to be the Fed rate, and the blue is going to be inflation. So here we have the same events, the big spin. And of course, we injected all that money, that cheap money. And so this was during a slow period because we were shut down in the economy. And then we unshut down the economy and we just started taking off. Here's the lag. We came back to life, massive amounts of inflation. And when did the Fed finally respond? 2 years late. So we have this kind of situation that when there's a lot of money floating around out there, the economy looks good in terms like the GDP, we got activity, but we get inflation when we have lots of customers for fewer items, we get higher prices. Now, if I take you right back to the center panel and we look at this and you're a buyer and we're still seeing that inflation is still high because we look at the CPI, what it is, shelter is up, and yet we're slow. If shelter is up when we are slow, and yet we have a great economic opportunity that we are now 9 months or so behind at the point where we were 9 months ago. So I would put it to you, looking at the money supply, that we're looking at increasing a little bit of the inflation just because of the money supply. And I like this word because it triggers some folks, irregardless of tariffs. Because if tariffs were going to cause this problem, we'd have started seeing it in January. Not now, but we're still seeing it back. Hit this one more time in the producer price index. Let's go back to that center screen. Which one is the big one? Is it goods that we would put a tariff on or services? It's in services, right? Isn't it? Services. So services are higher. So, you've got to filter this noise out to make sense of it. If you can cover what you do have, we didn't go into commercial banks and delinquencies and that kind of stuff. But you do see that in our area, according to Realtor, we are slowing down. But we had such a big bump to start with. Even if you don't get all of what in your mind you have fixed, I really think I should get this amount of money for the house. You don't need to look at what your expectations were from the very tippy top to what you didn't get. You need to look at where you bought it from to where it is now your appreciation. And a lot of that is going to be right according to the inflation, because that figures in the cost of building homes. All right, let's get to our numbers. Hello, I'm Delbridge of Benchmark Realty, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. If you are currently unrepresented and would like to know how to compare up to 3 properties side by side and room by room, then go over to my new YouTube channel, CallDelToSell. That's 1 L and Del, no spaces. Watch the demo on Real Scout, and then call me and we'll set up your exclusive ad-free account. All righty now. Last week, 8/8 of 25, we had 28,706 in the Real Scout system. That's your opportunities that went up over the previous period. We had 4393 in the under contract still holding on. That dipped a little bit, and the integer ratio dipped from 16% to 15%. This week, 8/14 of 25, we had 28,720 in the opportunities. That's up just a few because it was 706 to 720. And we had 4537, a pretty good jump in the under contract still showing. That jumped up and rounded that back up to 16. So we could call it 16 in the final numbers. So we've gone back up in our percentage. It's not dramatic one way, even though we're, quote, according to Realtor, the slowest #1 market. We're still selling. We're still holding through. You just want to make sure that when you're working on either side, you're not trying to beat the dust out of the rug on either party. A transaction works when you put both people together and they both get a little something out of it. You want to lose all your advantage? Don't have a transaction. Both sides lose. You want to get a little something. Maybe you don't get everything you want. Maybe you don't get everything repaired that you want. Maybe you don't get the full price that you think you might get. But if you get that transaction, you get to move on. And speaking of move on, I'll see you next week.